Let's now turn to our latest GB News People's Poll. Let me stress from the very beginning, it is a proper opinion poll with a phone-in based on a proper representative sample. It isn't one of those where somebody tweets something and says, let us know what you think. It is segmented to get the right numbers of old, young, male, female, black, white, the whole business. So these numbers do mean everything. And the headlines are pretty stark. Nearly half of you blame the government for the current mess that we seem to find ourselves in. And nearly half of you want a general election. Let's give you the headlines first. We asked the panel who they'd vote for if there was a general election tomorrow. Gap between the Conservatives and Labour Party is now 32 points to Labour's advantage. We also asked our panel who should be responsible for the current economic turmoil in the United Kingdom. 26% of you say global events, which is really the government's argument, outside UK's control. 9% say the energy companies, and 44% say it is the UK government itself that's responsible. On police officers, which we talked a lot about yesterday, 58% of our panel says that they should remain politically neutral, and only 16% say they can make political gestures like taking the knee. On those calls for an early general election, nearly half of our panel either supported or strongly support this. 14% say they oppose or strongly oppose such an idea. So does this reflect the frustration that people may have regarding the current political situation? On benefits, 57% of that panel either completely agreed or somewhat agreed that those on benefits should get a rise in line with inflation and not just according to the rise in average earnings, inflation, of course, being slightly higher. And finally, we asked our panel whether they will vote or not if there were to be a general election tomorrow. 10% said they certainly will not vote, but 56% say they certainly will vote. Well, joining me now live in the studio here is GB News polling analyst David Cowling to go through it all. I'm going to set aside the who would you vote for tomorrow, because it's part of the pattern that you and I discussed when we were last here, and also there isn't going to be a general election tomorrow. So let's just park that, but we'll come back to it. What I found really intriguing was that the government blames Putin and other global events for the cost of living crisis, but 44% of our panel blame the government.
Yes, and much to your surprise, there's quite a party divide on this issue. By which I mean that when it comes to global events, half of Conservatives think it's global events and 11% of Labour voters think it's that. But if you come to the government, 74% of Labour voters think it's the government's fault and a quarter of Conservatives. I was looking back to 2008, the big banking crisis. And in the initial stages of that, overwhelming incident, as we know, with great repercussions economically across this country and many other countries, and people were much clearer then that it was global events. They weren't blaming the government in anything like these proportions, so that must be concerned.
But I'll come to my second question in a moment, but there's an intriguing little point I hadn't realised until you gave me that background to it. So within that, Liz Truss, who is judged by many to be in trouble with everybody, not least her own party, is getting her message across on this to her supporters. Whereas Sir Keir Starmer, who says this is a homegrown, homemade crisis in Downing Street, is also being believed by his people and by swing voters. That's really important.
It is, and I think it also helps us to understand the underpinning of the headline voting intention, which we're not going into, but nevertheless to see a 32-point lead, those sorts of reactions underpin that.